Hello, everyone, and welcome to Spirit Plant Medicine Monthly. My name is Mark Dron, and I am here today with organizer, MC, and host of the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference, Stephen Gray. And it's a great pleasure to be here sharing the work of really the plants. And it gives me great pleasure today to introduce our topic. It's Coca, the divine leaf of immortality. And we're looking to bring some new awareness to this long forgotten plant ally that maybe has gotten a bad reputation just because of what's come out of it over the past decades. But before we go into that, I want to thank everybody again for being here and really being part of this community, because it's really important to really keep connected in these days. And we've been really grateful that Zoom and the online interactive events have been quite popular and really been a great venue in order to be able to do this work in a good and new way. So if you have any questions about Zoom, you have any concerns, or you need some help navigating some things in the chat, we have Danya Beatty here and Casey McFarland as our trustee support team. And if you have any questions, you can message them in the chat and they can get you all sorted out. And if there's no questions before that, we're going to get rolling. I'm going to pass it on to Stephen Gray to introduce our guests, and we'll get started. To you, Stephen.
Well, thank you, Mark, and welcome everybody. It's great to have all these people here, and lovely to see names coming up in the chat from all over the place. This is exciting, and actually, I think important. It came out of, for me, it came out of a conversation that Casey, who was just mentioned a moment ago, and I had interviewing Wade Davis, one of our two guests here. And unplanned, essentially. I'd like to think that the plant spirit had something to do with this. Can't prove that, of course. It wasn't a plan, but what happened was Wade ended up talking about Coca for the whole hour of that interview, and I got really inspired by that. Really occurred to me that, as you know, people like Wade and Dana already know, Coca is in bad need of a reappraisal. It's a much more important and valuable and safe plant than it's been given credit for, and as you'll find out as we go through this. So we're excited to have this share this information with you. So really briefly, just the format that we're going to follow today is, in a moment, I'm just going to briefly introduce Wade for those who don't know who he is. Probably aren't too many of you here that don't, but nonetheless. And then he will speak for approximately 20 to 30 minutes, and then I'll introduce Dana Larson, who will speak for about 20 minutes, and then we're going to have a discussion between the two of them, which I'll moderate, and that'll go for 20 to 30 minutes. And then after that, Mark Karan, your control control console host here, along with the help of Danya and Casey, will moderate questions. And Mark will be able to bring people up live so you can directly ask questions to Dana or Wade. And if you're not comfortable with that, you can put them in the chat, and Danya and Casey will make sure that they get looked over to make sure that they're good questions and so on. Yeah. So let's get right into it. These intros are going to be very sparse and short and off the cuff, so to speak. Wade Davis, I've known him for a long time. He's I don't mean to embarrass you, Wade, but as far as I'm concerned, Wade is one of the great spokespeople on behalf of bio and cultural diversity on this planet. He's a font of wisdom and knowledge on many subjects related to those areas. Anthropologist, ethnobotanist, and excuse me, and author or co-author of over 24 books, still writing actively. Wade has a long relationship with Coca. Oh, also, he's a recipient of many awards for the work that he's done over the years, including the prestigious Order of Canada. And he's also, as I was about to say, has a long relationship with Coca and the cultures associated with Coca. His most recent book, he's got more coming, but his most recent book is called Magdalena, River of Dreams, and Wade's described it as a love letter to Colombia. I've read it. It's a wonderful, in-depth, it really takes you into that world. I just entered into this world that Wade addressed, and so Coca is deeply associated with Colombia, and Wade is deeply associated with Colombia as well. So delighted to have you, Wade. Welcome.
Well, thanks very much, Stephen. And we're going to keep this kind of, somewhat informal between Stephen, myself, and Dana Larson. I mean, I'm so happy that Dana's with us, and Stephen will introduce him in a moment, because I think he plays a frontline and pivotal role in this whole story. But before I tell you about this sacred plant, this divine leaf of immortality, as it was known to the Inca, let's just do a little mind trip here. If I could tell you that there's a benign substance that's been used with no evidence of toxicity, let alone addiction, and nothing but benefits to the health for over 4,000 years. And it was something you could take when you get up in the morning. Its effect was so subtle that you didn't even feel in any way that you had been exposed to any kind of stimulant. You had none of the anxious anxiety that coffee can provoke, even the dark tea can provoke in some people. And you didn't even feel you had anything, you had taken anything, except suddenly you felt there was a little bit of a step in your foot, and a little bit of slight elevation, of a sense of not mood elevation as much as just being content with where you are in the world, such that you could sit down, as we all do, whether we like to admit it or not. We spend more of our time in whatever vocation we have, whether we're a lawyer, whether we're a doctor, whether we're a writer, whether we're a scientist, whether we're working in a secretarial capacity, we spend our time in front of a screen. And if you had a substance that allowed you not only to more comfortably, more happily spend that time in front of your screen, that enhanced your ability to focus, that gave you a slight edge, that just when you wanted to write that first sentence, whether it was in a letter to your boss or a report or a poem, whatever, that you just sort of overcome that impediment that we all face when we look at that blank white screen, metaphorically, and that you could take this substance all day long with no effect except a sense of contentment and well-being, happiness to be doing what you're doing, whether incidentally is at a laptop screen or working in your garden or walking up a mountain or whatever it be. And at the end of the day, you would simply stop taking it and go and get your dinner, say hello to your family, and do what everyone does in the evening, and go right to bed and have a pleasant sleep, and get up the next morning and do it all over again, such that your productivity soared, your creativity was enhanced, and your mood was gently and lovingly elevated. Who would not be interested in such a substance? Well, that is indeed the subjective effects of the divine leaf of immortality, Coca, the notorious source of cocaine. Now, of course, it's one of the adages of pharmacology that the purer the drug, the greater the potential for abuse. The first morphine addict was the wife of the man who invented the hypodermic syringe. Tobacco only became a dangerous drug with the invention by Duke of the cigarette machine and the development of mild strains of tobacco that allowed you to inhale it directly into the lungs. People like Ulysses S. Grant would die of cancer of the palate from cigars. There's a famous story from Washington University at the turn of the 20th century, like 1910 or so, when a surgeon shut down the entire medical school to bring everybody to the amphitheater so that they might witness a form of pathology that he assured them they would not likely ever see again in their careers, and that was lung cancer. Lung cancer was virtually unknown until the cigarette. And so when you extract cocaine from Coca, you have the crisis that we've encountered over the last 50 years. And of course, cocaine has been the curse of Colombia, a war that has led to 260,000 dead, 7 million internally displaced, 5 million forced to leave their homes, 100,000 disappeared, a war that would not have lasted a day without the profits of the illicit trade. Cocaine was the fuel that fired the agonies of Colombia. And you have to think for a moment that in a country of 50 million people, there were never more than 250,000 combatants. So most Colombians were caught in the vice of war, innocent victims, again, of a war that was made possible by the flood of money that swept over the country, so much money that at the height of the Medellin cartel, the cartel accountants were budgeting $1,000 a week just to buy elastic bands. Money was weighed in hay bales to estimate its value. 80 tons of coke a month being put into the United States, while the United States was spending $60 billion a year to try to stop the trade. $17 million a day coming into the coffers of the Medellin cartel. It created a tsunami of wealth. In the last year before the peace agreement was signed in Cartagena, in the last year of war, the FARC, just one of the leftist groups, was down to about 6,000, some might say 9,000 cadre, mostly teenagers in search of a meal. And yet in that year, through extortion and drug trafficking, the FARC made $600 million US. Well, if you give me the Boy Scouts of Kerrisdale in Vancouver and $600 million, I can wreak havoc throughout the province of British Columbia. So cocaine has been the curse, and the blood of Colombians is on the hands of anyone you have ever known who has ever used the drug, and every country that has facilitated black market trade by prohibiting its use without doing anything to curb its distribution in any meaningful way. How would the United States feel, for example, if Canada had patterns of drug consumption of cocaine hydrochloride in bars and boardrooms across the country, such that and laws that facilitated the creation of a criminal network, but sanctions and enforcement that did almost nothing to curb the spread of the drug and the distribution of the drug, such that 85 million Americans were forced to flee their homes. Well, that's what happened in Colombia. So in good measure, as my new book, Magdalena River of Dreams, points out, the cartels clearly emerged from the barrios and country clubs of Medellin and Cali. Colombians would never pretend to be not complicitous in this extraordinarily profitable trade. But ultimate responsibility for Colombia's agonies and for the agonies of the world lies in good measure with everybody who's ever bought illicit cocaine and every nation who's made possible that illicit trade by prohibiting the drug without curbing its use in any serious way. And after all the violence, the tens of thousands of lives lost to murder, prison, and war, there is today more cocaine consumed at any time in history. And the drug remains in play for the simple reason that in the lonely streets of New York, the office cubicles of London, the desolate bars and one-room flats of Miami and Madrid and every other glass-clad city of the world, cocaine makes people feel good, if only for a time. The American government alone has spent over $1 trillion in its war on drugs. Now, 50 years on, there are more people in more places using worse drugs in worse ways than ever before since the beginning of this misguided crusade. And tragically, the corrosive impact of the illicit trade will continue in places like Colombia, jeopardizing a peace agreement for which the people have struggled so hard to attain, unless the illicit trade is somehow eliminated with the cleansing stroke of legalization, which is in fact a dim prospect, despite being widely acknowledged as the only conceivable rational solution to the crisis. But critically, for all of that, Coca is not cocaine any more than potatoes are vodka. To equate the coca leaf with the raw alkaloid is as misguided as suggesting that the delicious flesh of a peach is equivalent to the hydrogen cyanide found in every peach pit. And yet for nearly a century, This is precisely what the legal and political position of governments and international organizations, it's been their position throughout the world. The American government in particular has long demonized the plant. Incredibly, in Peru, where the plant has a record in pre-Columbian history going back at least 4,000 years, every pre-Columbian civilization, from the prototypic progenitor of life in the Andes, Chavin, 2,000 years before the Christian era, all the way through to the Inca, via the Paracas, Nazca, Moche, Chimu, Chachapoyas, Tiwanaku, every major civilization in the Peruvian Andes and on the coast has used the sacred leaf. And yet in Peru, the efforts to eradicate the traditional fields, which began initially with the arrival of the Spaniards, who of course equated anything deemed to be sacred as a target for their campaigns during the Inquisition. And they only allowed coca to persist when they realized that the indigenous people could not be worked as slaves in the mines of Huancavelica and Potosi without the use of the mild stimulant. And the actual growth and distribution of coca leaves in the early years of the colony was one of the greatest sources of its domestic economy. But in the modern era, and this is an incredible scenario, the efforts to eradicate the fields began 50 years before there was a cocaine problem in North American and European cities. And what happened was that in the 1920s, as physicians in Lima looked up into the Andes and they saw what they deemed to be social pathologies, illiteracy, poor nutrition, poverty, alcoholism, abuse of mothers, whatever it was, there had to be a culprit. And because issues of economics, land distribution, and equity and justice challenged too closely the bourgeois foundations of their lives in Lima, they settled on coca as a demon plant of all. And so throughout the 1920s, it was blamed for everything and reduced to a caricature. And so in the 1940s, when a series of UN commissions would arrive in Lima to study the so-called coca problem, these commissions would literally arrive at the airport in Lima and announce their conclusions to their missions before even entering the country, always implying that the only thing to do with coca was to eradicate it as a curse of the Andes. Now, the extraordinary thing, through all of these years, none of these physicians did the obvious, a nutritional study of the plant to show what exactly it had in it. After all, this was something that was consumed by at least 6 million indigenous people every day of their lives. It was something that had been used for 4,000 years at least in the Andes. And had they done so, what they would have discovered would have been somewhat disturbing to them, because when finally in 1975, Andrew Weil, Tim Plowman, and Jim Duke at the USDA, as part of our multi-year coca study at the Botanical Museum at Harvard, when they did this simple nutritional assay, what they discovered horrified our backers at the US government. Yes, coca had a small amount of cocaine hydrochloride in it, roughly 0.5 to 1% dry weight, depending on the variety. And that amount of alkaloid was absorbed benignly and naturally within the mucous membrane of the mouth. And of course, no one noticed the irony that that same percentage of alkaloid content was roughly the equivalent to the amount of caffeine in a coffee bean. And no one objected at every drug abuse conference when the narcs and DEA agents bolted for the coffee pot at 10 o'clock in the morning. But in addition to the small amount of stimulant absorbed benignly in the mucous membrane of the mouth, coca was chock full of vitamins. In fact, the daily consumption of coca, or hayo as it's called in Colombia, by the elder brothers who are particularly dedicated to the plant, would satisfy all the daily nutritional needs for the entire range of vitamins in the modern medical practice of the FDA. In addition to being chock full of vitamins, the plant turned out to have more calcium in it than any plant ever studied by science, which was perfect for a traditional Andean diet that traditionally lacked a dairy product until the arrival of Europeans. In addition to this, the plant had enzymes in it which enhanced the body's ability to digest carbohydrate at high elevation, which made it the perfect adjunct to, again, an Andean diet based not simply on potato tubers, but on a whole host of tubers in various different genera as a mainstay of the diet. So in one simple nutritional study that could have been done at any time, Tim, Andy, and Jim Duke put into stark profile the draconian efforts that are underway to this day to eradicate the traditional fields. And they showed that this was a plant that had been used with no evidence of toxicity, let alone addiction, for, as I say, for over 4,000 years. Now, when we began our studies of coca in the 1970s, it was remarkable how little was known about the plant, common as it was. Obviously, as I said, there hadn't been a nutritional study of the plant, but also there hadn't been a thorough ethnobotanical look at the plant since Mortimer's classic book, History of Coca, which was published in 1901. Nobody knew where this plant originated, even though it was a vital producer of cocaine hydrochloride, which does remain our most important topical anesthetic. This again gets back to that adage, there's no such thing as good and bad drugs, there are only good and bad ways of using drugs. Abstinence can be a good way of using a drug, but certainly cocaine hydrochloride for nose, throat, and ear surgery remains our most powerful topical anesthetic. It's just not so wise to snort it up the nose, smoke it as freebase, or inject it into the veins. But we didn't even know where the point of origin was of this plant or how many species yielded the drug. So on this journey that was made possible by our great professor, the legendary Richard Evans Schultes, the director of the Botanical Museum, made possible by him and the USDA, and certainly infused with his spirit, Tim Plowman and I traveled the length of the Andean Cordillera, seeking the understanding of the mystery of the divine leaf of immortality. In the Andes, for example, men and women, when they meet on the trail, don't exchange handshakes, they exchange leaves. The proper salutation is to give someone 3 perfect leaves, which they form into a little cruceta, and then they turn to the Apu deity, the mountain that dominates wherever they are standing, and blow the energy to the mountain. This is called the Puke. And it's this idea that the energy of the leaf goes back to the mountain. From the mountain comes the rain that brings fertility. And it's a gesture, as are all gestures in the Andes, of reciprocity. Every single dynamic exchange, economic and spiritual and social, in the Andean Cordillera is based on fundamental notions of reciprocity. The land owes its bounty to human beings. Human beings owe their fidelity to the land. The rains evaporate in the clouds that precipitate on the flanks of living deities, the mountains, only to bring fertility to the soils. And in the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta, for example, one begins to chew the leaves as one takes a wife. In that particular tradition, only the men chew the leaves, and they begin to chew the leaves at the time of their marriage. And at the time of their marriage, they are given a gourd that will contain the fine ash made from the seashells that is sort of seen to empower the leaves. In order to release a small amount of alkaloid, you have to add some alkaline to the mouth. So you can use seashells, you can use limestone, you can use baking soda, or use ashes of certain plants. And then in the Sierra, as a man marries, he is given his poporo, which is seen as a symbol of the woman. The coffee stick is a symbol of the man as he perforates the gourd and then will begin to build up this calcium deposit around the head of the gourd, which becomes a sort of sign of prestige. And as he marries a woman, so he marries a life of chewing the sacred leaves. So Coca is deeply involved in rituals of all sorts. There is no gesture that occurs in the Andes that is not mediated by the sacred leaf. Tools that come back in the evening from a field are decorated with coca leaves. The field itself receives a sprinkling of blossoms and coca leaves before the collective labor begins. Coca is the mediator to the divine. Now, the interesting thing is we knew that the genus of coca was erythroxylon, and erythroxylon has hundreds of species around the world in the pantropical regions, and probably 30 of them have trace amounts of alkaloid cocaine hydrochloride in them. But two in particular had attracted the attention of archaeologists and anthropologists. In the southern Andes, there was the coca of Peru and Bolivia, and then clearly the coca of Colombia was distinct. And as we did the field work, it became clear to Tim Plowman that the coca of Colombia, which has a more delicate leaf, a smaller leaf, but the critical feature is the flowers are heterostylous, and that just means that the styles can be of two different heights, and that facilitates self-pollination in the population. Now, self-pollination is good for a plant, less good for a species in an evolutionary sense. And so the presence of heterostyly in a blossom is universally seen in botany as being a derived trait. And that allowed Tim to suggest that the plant of origin was in fact erythroxylon coca variety coca of the southern Andes, the coca you would encounter, for example, if you were taking leaves in the Cusco area. But the coca of Colombia he recognized as Coca novogranatense, a different species. Curiously, the Colombian coca was brought down the coast to Peru, and in the valley of Trujillo, a new variety was developed through artificial selection, Erythroxylon novogranatense variety trujillense. Now, this was a preferred coca of the Inca. It has a little bit of methyl salicylate in it. It's very flavorful. This became the coca of Coca-Cola. And just as a quick aside into that story of Coca-Cola, that began with an entrepreneurial Corsican by the name of Mariani. Now, going back to the original extraction of drugs from natural products, the first drug to be extracted in pure form in the 19th century was morphine from opium poppies. The second drug was cocaine from coca. And of course, Freud became enchanted with cocaine. In the 1870s, you get cocaine products in the pharmacy in hundreds of different forms. And initially, Freud famously thought that cocaine could be a treatment for morphine addiction until it proved to be more dangerous than the disease it was attempting to treat. But Mariani had this idea that you could take a red Bordeaux wine, put cocaine hydrochloride, pure alkaloid into the wine, add the flavorful leaves of the coca plant, and market it. And it was quite a zippy beverage, and it was hugely popular. The Pope carried a flask of it on his hip at all times. In fact, Mariani is the only human being in history with the distinct achievement of having turned on 5 European monarchs, 1 Pope, and 3 US presidents to cocaine. And then what happened is that in Atlanta, Georgia, a pharmacist bought the formula of Vin Mariani, and he knew that the temperance movement was coming on, the whole movement of Kellogg and the bubbly water and sparkling water. And so he removed the Bordeaux wine and substituted sparkly water because of its association with health spas. He also knew the Harrison Pure Food and Drug Act was coming on, and then he removed the cocaine but kept the coca flavonoids in the beverage, and then he added to replace the cocaine the cola nut of Africa, which is full of caffeine, hence Coca-Cola. And of course, this became the most popular beverage in the history of marketing. And that's why Coca is the real thing as opposed to Pepsi. And in fact, all our legal cocaine that was used in the pharmaceutical industry was cocaine extracted from the leaves of coca imported by the ton from Trujillo. That cocaine was sold at $25 an ounce to the legal pharmaceutical market, and then the flavonoids of the plant were put into the beverage itself. But back to the origin of coca, Tim then thought that the coca of Colombia had originated from the coca of Peru. Curiously, there's a fourth variety because in pre-Columbian times, the indigenous people of the southern Andes moved down the river, or maybe trade networks carried it, and the coca of Peru reached the lowland Amazonian forests of Colombia. There, the variety had half the cocaine content and was habitually planted and propagated vegetatively, not from seed. And that preparation is very distinct. Instead of harvesting the leaves, drying the leaves in the sun, masticating them with the addition of some alkaline, in the Amazon, they roast the leaves over a griddle until they're not too dry, but dry enough to be pounded in a mortar and pestle. And then the ash, the essential alkaline, is derived from the burnt leaves of a plant known as yaruma, a very common forest tree in the genus Cecropia of the fig family, or it's now its own family. And then all of that is put into a mortar and pestle and pounded in the maloca at night, and then sifted through either palm fiber or through cloth. And the final product, known as ipadu or mambe, is the consistency of talcum powder. And this is the champagne of coca. And this is something that is made with great elegance. And those who are connoisseurs of mambe can recognize the taste and the flavor in ways that a fine wine connoisseur would recognize the difference between a good red Shiraz and a bad one. And so Tim had this whole scenario, but here's where it gets interesting. What was not available to Tim, all of his work was based on morphology, breeding experiments, ethnohistorical documents, and so on. What was not available to him was DNA analysis. And now a wonderful young scholar, Dawson White at Field Museum, has gone back to Tim's collections and determined that, in fact, what happened was not coca of Colombia being derivative from the coca of Bolivia, but rather a case of true independent domestication of two major cultivated plants in the north, Erythroxylum novogranatense, variety novogranatense, in the south, Erythroxylum coca variety coca, both domesticated from a common ancestor, Erythroxylum gracilepes, which is a wild plant found growing all the way along the arc of the Ceja de la Montaña, the cloud forest, below the cloud forest from northern Colombia all the way to Bolivia. So it's a rather extraordinary example of two major domesticated cultigens, cultivars really, being independently through natural selection, through artificial selection, brought into the human repertoire. So when people say that coca really is the coca of the gift of Colombia, that Colombia coca was born in Colombia, it's because it really was. And so, you know, the fusion of coca and culture is complete in the Andes. You know, it was coca that allowed the imperial runners to deliver fresh fish from the sea to the table of the Inca in Cusco. It was coca that was scattered on the fields to bring fertility to the soil. It was coca that was used in every pre-Columbian civilization, going back thousands of years before the dramatic ascent of the Inca. And the nutritional value of coca never comes as a surprise to the students of South American history. In the immediate wake of the conquest, the Spaniards, in fact, while the church was trying to ban its use and its distribution, more independent scholars were singing its praises. In the royal commentaries, Garcilaso de la Vega states that the magical leaf satisfies the hungry, gives new strength to the weary and exhausted, and makes the unhappy forget their sorrows. Well, can't be anything wrong with that. And Pedro Cieza de Leon, who traveled throughout the Americas between 1532 and 1550, noted, quote, "When I asked some of these Indians why they carry these leaves in their mouths, they replied that it prevents them from feeling hungry and gives them great vigor and strength. I believe that it has such an effect." But the most effusive praise came in Colombia from the Jesuit priest Antonio Julian, who in 1787 published a book called The Pearl of America, an account of his years on the coast, where he came into enchantment with the use of hayo, as the plant is known by the elder brothers. And he spoke of the remarkable herb, and he said, "I feel great disbelief that Europe does not make use of the hayo, given the great consumption of teas and coffees. I attribute this to 4 causes. The first is ignorance about the excellent qualities of hayo. The second is that the Spanish nation has not been ambitious in introducing new fashions to other countries, even as we are willing to accept alien ones. The third is that foreign nations have more profit and advantages in promoting the use of tea and coffee. The fourth is that the news has not spread, and the time has not yet come to make taking hayo a fashion. It may be that hayo, like all things, will arrive in due time, and with the news that I provide of its admirable virtues and effects, it would be introduced not as an idle or useless or destructive fashion to households and people like others that arrive from overseas, but rather one that is healthy, useful, and beneficial to the well-being, vigor, and strength of the body, and that promotes long and prosperous maintenance of the individual." And so today, the efforts to continue to eradicate coca and block the commercialization of the leaves are ironically being driven from pressure from the United States, the very country whose consumption of cocaine has made possible the illicit trade that for over 40 years has been the primary cause of Colombia's misery. Even were the complete removal of the plant to be desirable, it's highly unlikely that Colombia could ever eliminate the cultivation of coca. The financial incentives for small family farmers are too great. Some say that it's worth 1,000 times more than any other cultivated product. And the potential growing areas are too vast and inaccessible, especially in the ecological and altitudinal zones where coca thrives. Aerial eradication efforts are also doomed to failure, even as they compromise the forests and taint the soil and waterways with toxins. And as I say in the new book, it's not unreasonable to ask why any of Colombia's biodiversity, perhaps its greatest national asset, not to mention the health and well-being of its children, should be put to risk to satisfy the misguided policies of a foreign country whose people seek salvation and contentment in the false promises of a drug best used as a topical anesthetic to numb the senses and to extract teeth. And so, having endured the consequences of the illicit trade for so many years, I say that it's time for the Colombian people to reclaim a stolen legacy by celebrating coca for what it really is, what the Inca saw it to be, the divine leaf of immortality. Marketed as a tea or nutraceutical, coca could become Colombia's greatest gift to the world, dwarfing the commercial success of coffee. And nothing wrong with coffee, I guess, of course, but its origins do lie in distant Abyssinia. Coca was born in Colombia. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Wade. As you heard, folks, Wade is a living encyclopedia of knowledge and making a fabulous case for the revitalization and the re-honoring and the reclaiming and the legalization of Coca. And by the way, if you were late in joining us, Mark, my co-host over here, is recording this, and we'll be playing it later. So don't go away. Wade's going to stay around, and we're going to have a little talk from Dana Larson next. And when Dana's done, we're going to have a discussion between Wade and Dana, and I will ask some questions if they run out of things to say, which is unlikely, knowing them personally. And following that, we'll take another, I don't know, 20 minutes to half an hour, depending on the time and what the interest level is, for audience questions. And my co-host, again, Mark Caron there, with his two assistants, Danya and Casey, will process questions either by bringing people up live on the screen, or if they prefer to just ask the question in the chat by dealing with them in that fashion. So again, thanks so much, Wade, for that incredible information. And now we're going to have a talk from Dana Larson. And just really briefly, Dana Larson lives here with us in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. And to my mind, Dana is one of the boldest, bravest, ballsiest innovators around, period. He's been at the forefront of the advocating for cannabis for, I don't know how long, Dana, at least 20 years probably in Vancouver. Not cowed by authority whatsoever, has always taken the lead and pushed things forward. And I don't know if you could ever prove this, but I suspect that the work and the activism, not just advocacy, that Dana has been engaged with cannabis over these last couple of decades has influenced, perhaps even significantly, the progress toward legalization, which, if you are in another country and aren't aware of this, I hope everyone in the world is, but cannabis is legal nationally, federally, for all adults in Canada. And so Dana has been, as I say, one of the leading figures in that work all this time. And more recently, he's now taken the mantle up of working with Coca that way and doing the same thing. He has a store in Vancouver called a Coca Leaf Cafe, which Dana tells me is the only store, you can correct me with the nuances, Dana, once you start speaking, but I'm told by Dana that this is the only store in North America that's actually openly selling Coca. So again, leading the way, wonderful advocate and articulate spokesman on behalf of things like this. And so welcome, Dana. Please take it away. Your mic's not on, Dana. You might have to unmute yourself.
There we go. Sorry about that.
No worries. Go for it.
All right, we're ready to go. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It was great to hear Wade Davis's talk, and I always learn some new things when I listen to him. And I've got a shop in Vancouver called the Coca Leaf Cafe. It's actually also a mushroom dispensary as well, but we'll get into that part a little bit later. But I think not just in North America. I think we're the only place outside of South America where you can walk in and buy Coca leaf and have a cup of Coca tea and look at live Coca plants. I've actually got a couple. Here's one of the ones I'm growing here. This is our Coca plant I grew from seed that I brought in from Colombia. And, Wade really talked about the benefits and the good things about Coca leaf. And I've been mostly known for cannabis and cannabis activism and working for legalization of cannabis for, you're right, over 20 years. And I think I helped bring Canada into legalization. And we still got a lot of work to do when it comes to marijuana laws. And, the legalization we've got needs a lot of improvement. There's still a lot of stigma and problems with how cannabis is being sold and the overregulation and penalization of cannabis users continues in different ways. But for me, it's always been a battle, not just about cannabis, but about ending the whole war on drugs. And I like to say that what we call the war on drugs is really a war on plants and plant medicines for the most part, and that, you know, cannabis flowers and opium poppies and coca leaves and magic mushrooms or psilocybin mushrooms and peyote cacti, these are all wonderfully beneficial medicinal plants with millennia of social, cultural, medicinal, sacred use, all deeply intertwined into the cultures of the areas where they're found, and all of them prohibited, and many of them transformed because of prohibition into something that doesn't really look like a natural plant anymore. And it's sometimes hard to see the connection between these things. But ultimately, these are plant medicines, and I'd like to see us returning to understanding that and having them accessible. And so with cannabis, I did a lot of different kinds of activism. I worked within the New Democratic Party for many years and passed policy resolutions. We held rallies and helped put on the big 420 rally in Vancouver, which we haven't done for 2 years, but had a wonderful time the last time we did it in 2019 with over 150,000 people coming out, and a really wonderful day. And to me, the most successful tactic, and the one that I think really led to changing the laws with cannabis, was this mass civil disobedience and opening cannabis dispensaries and cannabis shops. And I feel like we wouldn't have seen the law change in Canada if there hadn't already been hundreds of shops across the country openly defying the law and selling cannabis. That was really what made legalization happen, was the inability to shut these places down, largely due to a lot of good court decisions over the years, to a better understanding of what medical cannabis was. We were able to push open that door. And I think we're seeing the same thing starting to happen now with mushrooms, actually, psilocybin mushrooms. We're seeing a big cultural change. And I've got a mushroom dispensary. There's now 2 in Vancouver, and just talked to a guy who wants to open one up in Abbotsford. And I think we're going to see mushrooms and microdosing as well becoming another big thing across Canada and having a lot of access. And the thing about cannabis and mushrooms is that they're pretty easy to grow in Canada, and there's already a significant domestic supply of these things. So opening a mushroom dispensary, while there's some challenges involved in that, tracking down a good source of mushrooms, usually not such a big problem in Canada. But coca is very different because it's very difficult to grow coca in Canada. And even when you're growing it, the yield per plant is not as much that you can just grow a few plants. You really need to grow a lot of it to be able to have some kind of shop or a business. So that's why I'm the only guy doing coca leaf, is because I spent a couple of years in South America, meeting people in Bolivia and Colombia and Peru and Ecuador and elsewhere, and talking to the activists down there. There's a lot of people in those areas that are working to change the laws. There's a wonderful museum in Cusco, a coca museum, and another one in La Paz in Bolivia. And unfortunately, the founder actually of the Bolivian La Paz Coca Museum, a man named Dr. Jorge Hurtado, just passed on recently in the last few weeks. And I had the honor of meeting him a few times. He's written some books about coca culture and the legends of coca. And I'm hoping to actually translate and edit and put one of his books into print here in Canada. Unfortunately, he won't be around to see that, but there's definitely a strong movement, similar to the Canadian cannabis movement, to end the war on coca leaf and to reintroduce people to this, what this is, a natural plant medicine with a lot of benefits and a lot of positive uses. And, you know, I think sometimes that maybe there's a parallel world out there, one not too far away, where coffee was the plant that was prohibited and that caffeine was banned and demonized, whereas coca was accepted and brought into society. And that's certainly quite possible because coffee beans and coffee was prohibited at different times in history and came close to being prohibited at other times. And in the same way that coca leaf came very close to becoming mainstream, and coca drinks were accepted in mainstream for quite a while. And so, you know, in that world, people would be drinking coca tea, and there'd be coca being sold at Starbucks or whatever their equivalent was. But if you wanted a caffeine, you'd have to buy some likely a low potency or mixed product, and people using caffeine wouldn't be drinking coffee. They'd be snorting and injecting caffeine. Whereas coca users or cocaine users would primarily drink coca tea and coca extracts. And you know, you can buy caffeine powder And you can snort caffeine powder if you want to. And people do that. You know, if you Google snorting caffeine powder, there's a subculture of people that enjoy that. They talk about it on Reddit. But the vast majority of caffeine users, if they want a lot of caffeine, they just drink a lot of real strong coffee, or they'll drink energy drinks like, you know, Monster drinks or Red Bull or whatever that might have more caffeine in them. Or maybe if they're really hardcore, they'll take caffeine capsules or caffeine pills in some way. But people snorting caffeine is kind of not a very common thing, even though it gives you a strong buzz and wakes you up. And I feel that in this world where caffeine is prohibited and where Coca is allowed, that there are some people that snort cocaine, but they're as common as caffeine snorters are now. And that the most majority of people who want Coca or cocaine would drink it in a tea, a drink, and those who want really strong amounts would drink it in stronger drinks, or maybe take cocaine pills or something, but it would not be the same usage that we see now. And so a lot of this, I believe, is really just mediated by our culture, and that the prohibition pushes people towards more dangerous and more concentrated forms of use. Not so much because customers are demanding that, but because that is what is easier to smuggle. That is what is more profitable. We've seen this, of course, with opiates, where there's been more overdoses because of opiates every decade since they first banned opium smoking and opium tea in the turn of the century. And we've seen a progression from opium to morphine, and from morphine to heroin, now from heroin to fentanyl, and then carfentanil, and increasingly potent products, not driven by consumer demand, driven entirely by prohibition and what can be smuggled and what can be brought in. So ironically, of course, it's much harder for me to try to bring in coca leaf and coca tea in from these countries than it would be for me to bring pure cocaine in, because pure cocaine is so much more small and easier to smuggle and easier to work with, and trying to bring in whole coca leaf from Peru is extremely challenging, and bringing in coca tea is a little easier, but it's still pretty hard. And so that's one of the reasons I'm the only person doing this, and I worry still. I've called my place the Coca Leaf Cafe, and if I have some problems and can't bring in coca leaf anymore, then I'm gonna have to find a new name for my place. But as it stands now, I've been able to secure a pretty good supply and to outsmart customs for the most part, and be able to bring in coca leaf products and to make them available. And we experimented quite a bit in terms of how to make a good coca drink and what the right strength is. And we have two recipes that we sell at our cafe. We have the regular coca tea, which I think is quite strong. We kind of treat it like espresso. So we make a strong brew, we call it coca brew, and then we'll give you shots of that, which you can just take straight if you want, but usually you dilute it with hot water, or to make a coca tea, or dilute it with steamed milk to make what we call a cocacino, or you get a coca mocha or a coca loco drink where we add espresso shots with your coca to get something similar to the original Coca-Cola formula of coca tea plus a cola or caffeine product. And we have Coca Max as well, which is an even stronger brew that we've put together, more concentrated for those that like something stronger. We put a little bit of baking soda into the drink to help activate it. And we sell coca leaf chew products as well. Getting whole coca leaf into the country is very difficult, but I can get in a chopped coca leaf. Trying to chew the full powder leaf that we use for tea doesn't work very well. It's so powdery that it just absorbs all your saliva, and I can't really find a way to chew that. But the chopped coca leaf, it works well for chewing. And like they were mentioning earlier, we sell these little bags that you can buy that's got a mix of mint leaf, a bit of coca flour, some coca chopped leaf, and a bit of baking soda, and it works really well. It produces a nice numbing feeling in the cheek, and it gives you a stimulating feeling. And people think of coca or cocaine as something that's right to the moon. You do some cocaine and you're blasted. But coca in its whole form it's definitely stimulating. It makes you want to talk more. It gives you energy. It allows you to process oxygen more efficiently in your body. But it's also a very soothing effect as well, a very calming effect. And I describe it that you're processing oxygen more efficiently, so you get more oxygen to your brain, which stimulates your thoughts and which can give you ideas. It stimulates conversation. But in your body, it also, your muscles having more oxygen, they become more relaxed and kind of more calmed. And, in Bolivia especially, but also in areas like Cusco, where it's very high altitude, if you travel there, if we're ever able to travel the world again, you go to a place like La Paz, as a tourist, but also as a local too, the lack of oxygen in the air, because it's so high altitude, it can be really make you ill, and you'll find yourself waking up with a powerful headache. You'll feel nauseous and have to throw up sometimes, and trying to hike around the city or walk around, you get tired very easily. And you drink some Coca tea or chew some Coca leaf, and it is miraculous the effect it has. And I've seen people, lying down and unable to function. They have a cup of Coca tea or chew a bit of leaf, and they're ready to go and feeling good. And it's the ability to absorb and process oxygen more efficiently is really remarkable how it helps with this. And of course, that has an effect when you're not at a high altitude as well. And so I'm really happy about being able to bring Coca leaf into Canada and make it available. Like I was saying, to me, it's really part of a bigger effort to normalize these plant medicines, to teach people about these things. And so, cannabis, psychedelic mushrooms like psilocybin mushrooms, coca leaf. We also sell a herb called Kratom as well. And Kratom is a leaf from a tree that grows in Southeast Asia. People chew the leaf. It's kind of a bitter tasting leaf. You can make a tea out of it as well. And the powdered leaf looks very similar to powdered coca leaf. It's just a green powdered organic substance. But Kratom's really remarkable to deal with opiate addiction and opiate use and withdrawal, and also dealing with the things people use opiates for, like pain relief and relaxation. And Kratom, unlike heroin and fentanyl on that, a Kratom overdose, you just feel nauseous and throw up. You don't have respiratory distress or have the kind of overdose that you can die from. And so I'm pleased to be offering Kratom as well out of our shop. And especially where we're located on the edge of the downtown east side, there's a lot of people that can see the benefits of Kratom. And, there's been some studies into Coca as a substitute for cocaine, and not enough studies, but I do feel this is definitely something that should be looked into. And the fellow I mentioned, Dr. Jorge Hurtado, who was running the Bolivian Coca Museum in La Paz, he did some studies and found that cocaine users who wanted to reduce or modulate their use of cocaine, if they turned to chewing coca leaves instead, they naturally used a lot less cocaine and were able to stabilize their use. And I found this as well. I used to bring in coca leaf earlier, about 10 years ago. I was bringing it into the Vancouver Seed Bank, a business that I used to be running not too far away from where my coca leaf cafe is now, just a couple of blocks away. And we had people coming in saying, like, I'm a cocaine user and I have trouble, stopping my use, and I have compulsive use. And when I chew these leaves that I buy, I don't feel compulsion to use cocaine. I'm saving a lot of money. I'm feeling healthier and better. And so to me, that really is something that should be getting explored a lot more. And I feel the coca tea as well. But when you drink the coca tea, you definitely do feel it, but it takes a little while for it to come on like a drink, because it has to go through be metabolized by your body. But when you chew the leaf, the alkaloids are going right into your bloodstream from your cheeks. So it's not like a rush, but you get more of a rush and sort of a stronger, rapider impact when you chew the leaves than you do when you drink the tea. And in South America, you find that it's almost exclusively indigenous people and tourists that chew the leaves, and that the drinking the tea is more other cultural groups that drink the tea and don't chew the leaf so much. It does vary by region and by area, but chewing the leaf is more sort of a traditional indigenous kind of thing. But I love chewing the leaf when I can, and I love drinking the tea. I had one here. I just finished up a little bit here. We sell a sparkling Coca soda at our cafe, where we mix the Coca brew extract with some Perrier and maybe some syrup to give it some flavor. And I love these things. They're really nice. And I used to drink a lot of coffee, and I found that trying to quit coffee drinking was extremely difficult, and caused intense headaches and caused a lot of pain and anguish. And like anything, any stimulant can cause withdrawal symptoms and can be difficult to stop. But I definitely find when I drink Coca tea that I don't get the same kind of withdrawal and the same kind of challenges I did with drinking coffee. And I think it's a wonderful drink, and I'm really happy to be making it available to people here. And I just want to give some facts that, Wade Davis brought up some great information about Coca and about Coca-Cola Company, and about how they are still the world's biggest growers of Coca. They have a sub-company called SPM, the SPM Company, and that's like a subsidiary of Coca-Cola. And every year they import about 150 tons of coca leaf from the Peruvian government, from a national corporation in Peruvia. And they say that they extract the cocaine out, which they sell for pharmaceutical purposes, and then they use the rest for their drink. And I wonder about that, because when you extract the cocaine out of a leaf, you're not left with like a delicious extract that you want to put into your drink. You're kind of left with kind of a goop that's not, depends how you do it, I guess, but certainly how they, when groups are making cocaine, the leftover product is not something you want to put into a drink. So that's kind of interesting. And Coca-Cola was trying to grow cocaine or coca leaf in Hawaii for about 20 years. In the 1960s, 64, when cocaine was really becoming prohibited and there was a lot of effort, they were worried they were going to lose their coca leaf supply. So they started growing it in Hawaii with the University of Hawaii. It was very hush-hush. They didn't want to talk about it. They really did not want people to know that Coca-Cola Company was growing this leaf. But they spent about 20 years trying to grow it, and they couldn't really get it going in a proper way. And in fact, near the end of their project in the early 80s, they got infected with this pathogen called Fusarium oxysporum, which was killing all of their plants. And then the American government was like, this kills coca plants. Hey, maybe we can spray Fusarium oxysporum all over Colombia and Peru and destroy all their coca plants. And they looked into this and were seriously talking about it at the time as a way of like weaponizing this pathogen to wipe out the coca fields. Happily, they didn't do that. They couldn't make it work. Unfortunately, they still spray toxins over the field, especially in Colombia. They're starting that again. And there's many stories of farmers, they're growing this plant. There's some poor person trying to make a living. This plant is worth a lot of money. And it's been part of their culture for a long time. They get poison sprayed over their crops. Sometimes their kids get poisoned or die or get sick. It causes a lot of harm. And of course, more Colombians die from American tobacco products than Americans would ever die from Colombian coca products. But can you imagine Coca sending airplanes full of toxins and pesticide or herbicides to go and fly over the tobacco fields in Tennessee and spray them with herbicides to wipe them out as a health prevention measure in Colombia? I mean, that would be an act of war, and things would really change. But it goes to show, that how we look at these substances is really very arbitrary. And certainly, people think of cocaine or some of these things, they have a lot of negative connotations to it. And we've all been indoctrinated into this idea that these things are intrinsically harmful. But ultimately, cocaine is an alkaloid from a plant. And like Wade Davis talked about, it's been used for thousands of years in a very safe and natural and beneficial way with immense cultural, spiritual, social relevance. And I think that understanding that and returning to that perspective of these are plant medicines. And hey, I believe cocaine should be legal. If you want to buy pure cocaine, you should be able to. But the reality is, I think that when you legalize these things and make them available, people trend towards the milder forms. In fact, if you look at marijuana, since legalization and since the last couple of years, what's the biggest expansion of cannabis products? It's not in people eating the strongest edibles to have the most powerful cannabis experiences. It's CBD. CBD, the minimal or no psychoactive product, is the one that is growing in popularity. We look at mushrooms. As mushrooms become more popular, it's certainly, people can benefit from psychedelic and larger dosages, but as we see mushrooms become more popular, it's not people doing heroic dosages that everyone's doing. It's microdosing that becomes most popular. And I predict that microdosing is going to be the CBD of mushrooms and become incredibly popular and widespread among people who have no desire to trip and no desire to explore psychedelic experiences will be microdosing. And so I think in the same way, if we legalize coca and cocaine in all of its forms, I don't think we'd see everybody starting to inject cocaine and starting to smoke cocaine. I think the trend would be towards the milder forms, and that we would see an explosion in the use of coca tea and coca chewing gum, which we also sell at our cafe, and perhaps chewing coca leaf or things like that. But I don't think we would see. In fact, I think we would see ultimately a reduction in the use of pure cocaine because people would have milder forms available. And if you wanted to snort pure cocaine, just like you can snort pure caffeine, or you can do dabs of the mightiest THC if you want, some folks are going to be into that, but they're a minority, really. Most people want milder forms. You can inject alcohol and get super drunk super fast. And if we really banned alcohol, injecting alcohol would become a common thing because you only need a little bit to have an effect. But now, who injects alcohol? It does happen. You look it up. The odd person does it, but it's not a reality for the 99.999% of alcohol users. And so this to me is what my campaign is about, what my life's work is about. And I want to use the same tactics that we used to change the cannabis laws, mass civil disobedience, challenging the law directly. And I think that, that doesn't work in every country, certainly. There's people on death row in Malaysia for selling medical cannabis. And actually one of them just got Dr. Muhammad Luckman, a fellow I follow. He just was on death row for a couple of years for selling medical cannabis. And they decided not to give him the death penalty. He's going to get 5 years, time served, and like 20 strikes with a rattan cane, which is vicious how they do that, but I guess better than the death penalty. But certainly I wouldn't be a medical cannabis activist breaking all these laws in the same way if I lived in a country where I might face death. But luckily in Canada, and in Vancouver especially, we have an environment where it's a bit easier to push the law like this and to set a good example for other people. And so I'm using that to full advantage with my Coca Leaf Cafe and mushroom dispensary. And I'm hoping that others will imitate this, and that in a few years we see mushrooms. And hey, if people can get Coca in and find ways to do it, I hope they do. I hope they're inspired by me to try to figure out how to bring Coca in. Or maybe someone will start growing a Coca plantation in greenhouses here in Canada. That would be lovely, and something I'm kind of working towards. So we can have a domestic Coca supply, although I think it's good to, bring it in from these countries and provide like work. And that's really where it should be coming from. But teaching people about Coca Leaf and getting Coca Leaf into Canada is part of my mission. And I invite you to check out cocaleafcafe.com. I'll be giving you a 10% discount code, but not quite yet. And come down to the cafe. And I'm working on selling live plants on Coca Chew, Coca tea powder you can brew at home, and also Kratom, mushroom, make your own mushroom kits. We can't just grow Coca. Look at this thing all full of mushrooms right here. This is a strain called Penis Envy, which I would really like to rename because I hate having to say that word all day at work. Nothing wrong with a penis, but it's weird having to talk about them all the time. But look at all those mushrooms you can grow yourself in a home-grown mushroom kit. So you can grab a Coca plant, you can grab a mushroom kit, and maybe some cannabis seeds or something, and you can grow at home and create your own supply. And that's really what it's about. And I think that's all I got to say right now. So I'm going to cede the floor back to everybody else. And thanks so much for listening to what I had to say.
There we go. Thank you, Dana. Fabulous information. And as I said at the outset, one of the boldest, bravest, ballsiest, and most innovative people you'll meet anywhere, folks. Really doing some wonderful advocacy and activist work on behalf of Coca. And again, Dana made a quick reference to it. If you stay to the end, and we certainly hope you will, Dana is going to give you a password or passcode for a 10% discount on select products. And Dana, just before we go, I'm going to ask some questions to both you and Wade, but just before we do that, in case it doesn't come up later, I see in the chat that your web store is now open. Will people be able to get the discount through the web store as well?
Yes, absolutely. That's how it works. It's give you a coupon code. You can use it when you buy stuff. If you come down to the store in person and you say, I watched the cast and I want to get it in person, we'll give you the 10% discount as well. You just got to come by the store really and say it. But if you're not in Vancouver, you do mail order all across Canada. Some things we'll send overseas, but not like out of the country, but a lot of things we don't, but cocaleafcafe.com.
Okay, well, that's excellent news because obviously not everybody who's watching this is here in Vancouver with us. So that was part one of our three-part program today, folks. And the next two parts are first, I have some questions for Wade and for Dana, and they may have some questions for each other as well. And we'll see how long that lasts, perhaps 20 to 30 minutes. And following that, my co-host Mark Caron is going to open it up for the rest of you to ask questions to either or both of these gentlemen. And that will go on perhaps for 20 to 30 minutes. We hope to have this wrapped up by about 6 p.m. Pacific time. Wade, I want to come back to you for a minute. First a little preamble, very brief. Clearly, as I'm sure most, if not everyone watching this is aware, this is not an academic exercise we're engaged in here. This is about reclaiming coca and bringing it into culture. And so one thing I'm wondering about, Wade, is uh, if coca is legalized internationally or in countries like the U.S. and Canada and so on, what do you see happening in Colombia economically, socially with that, and perhaps the neighboring countries as well?
Well, I mean, I think the key thing we want to try to do, and it's not going to eliminate a black market trade in cocaine. I think Dana's quite right. Most advocates of creating a nutraceutical market for coca in Colombia, and I'm talking about people like President Juan Manuel Santos, a Nobel laureate, who on a recent podcast with me said something quite remarkable. He said, no one in the history of coca has done more to eradicate the plant, to fumigate more acres or tear out more plants. And he said on the airwave, I was wrong, totally wrong. That was not the way to go. So ultimately, to eliminate the black market, we have to legalize all drugs. And I think Dana's points there was a subtle point in what Dana said that he might have jumped over too quickly, is that the very energy of the illicit trade generates the use of the drugs. Because the illicit market is so corrupt, so lucrative, that it creates a kind of energy of heroin in a community or of cocaine in a community. And when you eliminate that profit motive and that criminal incentive with legalization, as Dana said, the whole thing just comes down a few notches. And so legalization never has implied increased consumption. In every jurisdiction, legalization has statistically brought on less consumption, and as Dana said, the use of more benign forms of the various stimulants. The other thing so in Colombia, there's a very strong move. It's almost become a symbol of patrimony and patriotism. People are fed up of having America export its problems to them, to their detriment and suffering. But Dana made one passing reference which really caught my ear when he spoke about the campaign to reintroduce biological pathogens of coca into the plantations in South America. And this is a story that Dana will appreciate. When I came back from South America, Dana, I was a young kid, and Tim Plowman, with whom I was working, he was I was a field assistant to Tim. Tim told me there was a job available at the USDA that he wanted me to apply for, but he told me that if I took the job, he'd kill me. So I went out to the USDA in Beltsville, Maryland, and I walked into this office, and the first thing I noticed that this had to be DEA, not USDA. The second thing I noticed was the man himself was a drug addict. I couldn't get in the room for the cigarette smoke. Third thing I noticed was this anti-drug crusader had his walls covered by seized paraphernalia. It was like going into the office of an anti-pornographer and having pornography on all the walls. Then I'm looking at this guy. It's the mid-1970s. He's got a big butterfly collar, hairy chest, gold chains around his neck, gold nuggets on his wristwatch. And I'm thinking, where have I met you before? And then I asked him what he wanted me to do. And what he wanted me to do, the only thing they had derived from our 2 years of field studies was that we were good at finding coca fields. And what he wanted me to do, Dana, was to go back into those fields with the biological pests, reintroduce them to destroy the fields. That's after 2 years of our research, right? And then, Dana, I'm looking at this guy and I'm thinking, where the hell have I seen you before? And it suddenly dawned on me, I had never literally met him, but I had met him a million times in Medellin, because where I lived in Medellin on the farm in 1973, Carlos Lira was right up the road. The cartel was just emerging. These were kind of just sort of, sleazy Colombian hippies were onto a good thing, being paisas. And so we used to have people, I always hated cocaine, and I was lucky to have that sense of it. But people would come over to our farm in 1974 with briefcases full of cocaine. I'm talking 4 inches deep, a briefcase of pure Colombian cocaine. And as long as they could play their guitars loud, anyone could have as much cocaine as they wanted. I always just disappeared into the forest. I didn't like the vibe. But the point is that I knew that scene, and that guy was a scene. The point is the DEA is the same thing as a cartel. They're two sides of the same coin. And nobody in the DEA wants to end the war on drugs. We now know absolutely historically that the war on drugs began as a political maneuver of Richard Nixon. Ehrlichman, his main domestic advisor, makes this abundantly clear in his memoirs. They wanted, for political purposes, to cleave off the hippies, the students, the blacks, the drug users, from what they were going to be calling and trying to consolidate as their political base, the so-called silent majority. The war on drugs at the beginning had nothing to do with drugs and everything about demonizing a subset of our society to galvanize political support in the political conservative mainstream. And we've now had $1 trillion of the war on drugs, $60 billion a year. The Washington Post did an expose showing that virtually every branch of the US government gets a finger in that pie. They have no incentive whatsoever to win the war on drugs. What will end the war on drugs is what Dana said. When the public demands it, it will happen. The politicians follow, they never lead. And it's people like Dana who will set the spark. And that's what we need to do with Coca. And I mean, this cocaine thing is so crazy. It's almost, I mean, I'll tell you one other anecdote. I got a call from a lawyer in Brazil, in the city where the Peruvian captain of the football team played for a Brazilian squad. And for the first time in a decade, Peru had qualified for the final rounds of the World Cup. And their captain, playing in Brazil, had gone through a random drug test and been shown to have residues, minor residues of cocaine hydrochloride in his blood. He was going to be disqualified from the World Cup. There would have been riots in the streets of every Peruvian city. And they contacted me as a Coca authority asking for my insight. And I testified as a legal witness the obvious. This man must have had Coca tea at a luxury hotel somewhere in the Andes, which proved to be the case. And he had never come close to coca leaf or cocaine, but he had had mate de coca. And that's why he had the residue. And because of that, we got him off the conviction. He played for the Peruvian team. And frankly, a football war was avoided between Brazil and Peru. But that's how absurd it is. Look, when these drugs come into society, the societies, as Dana said, have to adjust. You know, the French Revolution, rather, was caused by caffeine. Now, that may sound crazy to you, but think about it. Until the mid 17th century, mid 18th century, the only, really the mid 17th century, the only liquid available, you couldn't drink the water in any river or stream without getting cholera. So the entire continent was mildly besotted. You drank mead, you drank wine, you drank beer or alcoholic beverages, which took care of the pathogens. And suddenly within a decade, 3 central nervous system stimulants arrived from beyond Europe: chocolate from Guatemala, tea from China and India, and of course coffee from Abyssinia and eventually from Brazil. And all of these central nervous system stimulants have to be made with boiled water, and that takes care of the pathogens. And at the same time, they're highly valued commodities, so people gather around the coffee houses like they're going to be gathering after this broadcast around Dana's Coca Cafe, and these places become the locale of intellectual ferment and coffee houses. And you can even see in the literature of the 17th century, in the writing of Samuel Pepys, for example, that cynicism of Jonathan Swift and Gulliver's Travels, all of that is fueled by caffeine. You can read it in the literature. And so these centers become centers of intrigue. And in fact, the mob that set the seed of the mob that stormed the Bastille, that sparked the French Revolution, grew out of a group of intellectuals in Voltaire's favorite coffee house. So we get used to these drugs over time, and it's really time to recognize that Coca, and I love what Dana said, you know, importing coca leaves are not going to drive people to use cocaine. On the contrary, they will drive people not to use cocaine because cocaine happens to be a rather crummy drug, right? So legalization will sweep away so many problems. And the challenges of legalization, which are trivial in comparison to the known consequences of the black market, it's just time to end what will be seen 100 years from now as the greatest public policy of our generation.
Wow, brilliant, Wade. Thank you. We're speaking about legalization here a lot, and Dana, you're the man on the ground. So when you were giving your talk a few moments ago, Dana, you said something about that you and whoever is working with you are plan on employing some of the same kind of tactics that you used and were influential in helping get cannabis legalized in Canada, pardon me. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what that blueprint might look like, and not just for Canada, but for other jurisdictions?
Yeah, well, I mean, the civil disobedience tactic of just trying to do it and create the society you want to live in or create what you want there to be. I want there to be Coca tea shops that I can go in and have a cup of Coca tea and a sandwich. And there isn't any, so I made my own so that there could be some. And hopefully others will copy that. And like with cannabis, we opened up the door with an understanding of the medical benefits of cannabis and getting the courts to go along with that, and having certain patients being able to force the government to let them have access, and then ultimately to start growing it for people and moving forward like that. And but it took, I think, the dispensary movement and people opening shops and selling medical cannabis, and then that definition of what medical means really sort of expanding and growing over time. And there's less now, but at the peak, there was probably 500 shops across Canada selling cannabis in various forms, none with the license, or very few under any kind of legal control, as what I think was the largest mass civil disobedience movement ever in Canadian history. There's never been anything else like that. Like operating openly and above ground. There's certainly a lot of places selling alcohol during alcohol prohibition, but they weren't like doing it in defiance. They were more hiding usually and doing it more secretively. And I think we're going to see the same thing with mushrooms and mushroom dispensaries. And so with Coca, it's more challenging because you have to bring it into the country. And so it makes it more difficult to create something, to create that connection and that supply. But I got to feel that people are watching this, or people are seeing what I'm doing and being like, hey, I want to try to do that too. And I would love it if somebody else opened a Coca tea shop in Toronto or in Vancouver, maybe not right next door to my place, but in Vancouver, it's a big city. I'd love to see that kind of thing expanding. And when I announced my mushroom dispensary 2 years ago, I did it. I said, I'm going to do it online, and then I'm going to open a storefront soon. And that became a big issue in Vancouver. And a city councilor, Melissa DeGenova, who's kind of anti-cannabis, someone I spar with a lot on Twitter. And she was very worried about this and brought forward a motion at city council to shut down any potential mushroom dispensaries before they could open, and really sort of targeting my efforts. And it was great because it brought a big backlash, and the Vancouver community came together, and there was dozens of speakers at City Hall, and a Decriminalized Nature group came out, and it was really a good chance to have a real talk about the benefits of mushrooms. And other councillors kind of laughed at her, and the motion didn't get passed. But one thing she said during that on Twitter one time was like, "What's next, Dana? Cocaine microdoses?" And like, that's in a way exactly what a cup of Coca tea is. I wouldn't normally frame it like that, but really a microdose is when you take a smaller, more manageable, safer kind of dose than a typical big dose. And that's really, that kind of thing. So that's interesting to me. But I think that educating people, that pushing it forward and just defying the law. And although Coca tea it's a Schedule I drug under the law.
No, it's not. No, it's not. No, it's not. No. Coca is Schedule
in Canada.
2. Is it Schedule I, Dana? Is it Dana?
Yeah, I'm Dana. Yeah, Canada.
No, Dana. No, I was just asking Dana. No, Dana. I was asking that. Sorry to interrupt, but I went through. I was curious because it's our talk of promoting legalization. One point Andrew Weil made when I was last in touch with him. Maybe I'm just talking about the States, and the whole schedule thing could be different in Canada. But in the States, surprisingly, Coca leaf is Schedule II, whereas cocaine Schedule 1. So I don't know, is there a different schedule?
Canada's different. Canada's different.
Oh,
In Canada, Schedule 2 is just cannabis. It's all by itself. And Schedule 2 are cannabis-like things. Schedule 3's got mushrooms and other stuff, but the cocaine and heroin, and the law just defines the coca plant in there along with cocaine and a bunch of like chemical things as prohibited. So in Canada, that being said, I'm unaware of any Canadian ever being charged for coca leaves. I think the courts would definitely treat it differently. But under the letter of the law, when I grow a coca plant, I'm manufacturing cocaine or whatever, right? But I mean, I don't want to, and my efforts are not to get arrested and go to court. But if I did get arrested and had to go to court, I think we can make some pretty compelling arguments that growing a coca plant is not the same as manufacturing cocaine, and that selling coca leaf and coca tea is not the same. But under the law, it's all defined as one thing. And so theoretically, I could face quite severe penalties, but I really very much doubt that would happen. I don't expect I'm going to get raided. I don't think the VPD particularly care about coca tea. If I did get charged and raided and went to court, I would be very surprised if any judge in Canada decided I deserve jail time for like my, political and stance and what I'm doing. It's just not going to happen, right? So if I was in Malaysia and facing the death penalty, I don't think I'd be as brave as some of those activists there that do some of the stuff that they do. But I think that we're pretty safe. But under the letter of the law, there was leaf, coca plants, all Schedule 1. I
mean, it raises an interesting question in terms of this strategy. Do we try to push for the legalization of all drugs and therefore all forms of coca and cocaine, or do we try to decouple coca as a nutraceutical and leave the cocaine thing to the future?
I mean, I obviously believe things should be pretty much, you can buy a rat poison and snort that if you want.
I agree.
But I also think strategically, people are going to be, I don't think anybody, even the most anti-drug person, is highly unlikely to think you really should go to jail for growing a coca plant and chewing the leaves in your own home.
I mean, I think one of the things
it helps destigmatize it, and then once people get that understanding, you can kind of move beyond that, right? But I think that with cannabis too, people went from the idea that cannabis is this hedonistic thing that hippies to like my grandma uses cannabis for her arthritis, and that changes it. And I think people, he's not, but people are very afraid of snorting caffeine or cocaine, of injecting cocaine, and those kind of things I think are going to be much harder to get legalized. And if we can get other things available in different forms and change the way it looks, and maybe your stronger thing is a drop that you take but not something you snort. I think those kind of things, you can make a really strong cup of coca tea if you want to. You can concentrate it down and make it really strong. It's stronger than most people might want, but maybe someone who's using cocaine might need that kind of jolt. And I still think people are more likely to accept a really strong cup of tea to, we're going to let this person buy cocaine and snort it. That for a lot of people is too much.
I think when we have these conversations that, we forget that you and I say, for example, I've thought a lot about this, and a lot of people are still out there equating coca and cocaine. And I think it's important to reiterate, even to this group of this audience of Stevens, is that, as I say, potatoes to vodka, coca to cocaine. I mean, the subjective effects of the way one would normally use coca leaves as a mild stimulant are so subtle in comparison to, the straight ingestion of cocaine hydrochloride that you can almost not, speak of them in the same breath. And it's important, I think, for people to realize that when we're talking about the use of coca, we're really talking about a subtle, gentle, benign nutritional supplement
I'm not sure I agree with you, Wade. I mean, I think it's definitely of a different kind, and it's definitely a different thing. But I mean, when you chew a mouthful of coca leaves and your whole cheek goes numb and you're feeling energized and good, I mean, that's a subtle effect, but it's also like, it's like drinking a cup of coffee. I mean, if I have a shot of espresso or a couple of shots of espresso, that's a pretty strong effect. Like I really feel that. And when I chew coca leaf or drink strong tea, it's not. I don't feel
I'm not saying that Coke has no effect. We use it because it has an effect. But 2 shots of Tinto are not the same as injecting caffeine. And the experience that people have when they inject smoke, freebase, or snort cocaine is simply, you like anything else. Obviously, if you stay up all night chewing leaves with the mamos and as they always say of gringos, they chew coca like horses eating hay. They're so crude. and they know none of the protocols, yeah, of course, like any other substance, you can overdo it with black tea, you can overdo it with tobacco, you can overdo it with, obviously with coffee. But I'm just talking about, I think it's important that we make it clear to people that the kind and normal use of Coca, it doesn't mean that you don't get a little lift off. That's the point. You're getting a little mild stimulation, but in a world where people cannot even begin to distinguish the plant from the drug, I think it's important to stress that it's really apples and oranges.
Yeah. Gentlemen, I'm
Oh,
going to
I
cut in
agree.
here for, please. Yeah, thanks, Dana. We're now at 5:30 here on the west coast of Canada, and I would like to give an opportunity for our participants, our viewers, our audience members, to weigh in with questions for either of you. So I'm going to turn it back over to Mark, my co-host Mark Caron here, with his assistants Casey and Danya, to take care of that, and just encourage people to, if you have a question, let you know that you're going to be able to go up on the screen live to speak directly to one of these two gentlemen, or if you're not comfortable with that, put it in the chat. I see we're already getting some interesting comments, so I think this is going to be quite lively, but I'll leave the moderation of that to my partners here, with just one more reminder that if you wait till the end, which will be another, I don't know, 20 to 30 minutes probably, Dana is going to give you the secret passcode, and that's going to allow you to get a 10% discount on select products from his store, either in person at 651 East Hastings in Vancouver, or at least in Canada, through the web store. And as I think Dana mentioned earlier, possibly some of the products can go off, outside of Canada as well. But now I'm going to turn it back to Mark Caron.
Thank you, Stephen. Wow, that was great, guys. I really appreciate the two different angles and approaches that you bring to the table, and Wade, your stories and your information from your work down in those areas is just certainly mind-blowing for me, and I really thank you for sharing that. And Dana, I really appreciate the work that you do as an advocate for plant medicines in all its forms, because I think these are the kind of movements that create the change, so that we can, have these things change within our history. And if there's one thing I've learned, and comes up in a conversation in regards to spirit plant medicines, there's so much more to the plant than just the active ingredient like the cocaine and being extracted. And it's the spirit of the plant that is in all parts of the plant. And I think that's what we're really hearing today as well. That's really important. Now I want to open up the floor to anybody who may have a question for Wade or Dana. There is, under the reactions on the bottom of your Zoom toolbar on the bottom, you can actually raise your hand. And if you raise your hand, you'll come to the top of our screen, and you are welcome to ask Dana or Wade a question. We have Simon Scott. Simon, can we ask you to turn your camera on, please? Thank you.
You got it.
There we go. All right. Welcome, Simon. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Embarrassing, I was a little bit late to this talk, but still, nevertheless, got a chance there to hear what you guys are discussing. So, I'm half British, half Colombian, and obviously, it's been harrowing to see what's going on in London, especially with the huge amounts of cocaine that are being consumed every single day. And then coming over to Colombia recently and seeing the fumigations and everything that's going on. So I went to work for a fund, and I'm not here to promote it, so I'm not going to say which one it is, but they're working with lots of things like mushrooms, cannabis, and now going into coca. And they're thinking about making textiles from cannabis, consumer goods from coca and CBD and also mushrooms. Now, I actually resigned from there because of it sort of went to this traditional business of some of the Colombians basically just selling abroad to the West and just creaming off the profits from the top, and then everything just remains the same in Colombia. People still are earning just what they would be earning they weren't if they were working for narcos or anything else. So that legalization process didn't work. But then I sort of went on to think, okay, well, what can I do? And I was thinking about actually making a Coca tea and commercializing something in Colombia, something similar to Hatsu. But then I kind of hit a roadblock, because when I went to actually talk to the indigenous communities, it became clear that it was so difficult to work with Coca if you're not part of really that indigenous community, because of the respect that they have for that plant. It becomes very, very difficult. So how do you, Wade, or indeed Dana, if that's how you pronounce it, see the commercialization of Coca and all these other powerful plants working in the commercialization process without falling to a disrespect of how the indigenous community see it?
Well, you know, I mean, Coca is used throughout Latin America, in the Andes and the Northwest Amazon, and you know, vast fields of coca in Quillabamba below Machu Picchu and the Yungas of La Paz. You know, these are commercial operations that have long served a market in the cities of the highlands where coca cannot be grown. And so this is not like, say, just because the people, when they use their leaves, are reverent in the way that they use them, doesn't mean that a commercial market can't be created. That's what we've had in the Andes for hundreds of years. Truckloads of coca coming up from the lowlands to be sold in the markets of Cusco. What's actually happened is the price of traditional leaves has gone up dramatically, not for the gringo, but for the traditional people, because of the illicit trade in cocaine. And so, whereas coca leaf was almost ubiquitous in daily life, it's become a little pricier for people to get in the island. But the issue, there's no impediment based on the sacred nature of the plant. It's just part of the mainstay of human life in the Andes. Go ahead.
Oh, I would just add, yeah. I mean, I've, I would think that legalization, like for my cafe, I'm only bringing in relatively small amounts for one place, right? So I'm not really having a big impact on the coca industry in Peru or anything like that. But there's definitely a robust market. It's very easy to buy coca products and coca leaf in Peru, Bolivia, and in Colombia. It's less accessible, but it's definitely available. Coca tea and coca in various quantities and stuff. So it's more about getting it into Canada and sneakily and dealing with that right now. And if we had a real industrialized thing where coca was fully legal, I imagine there'd be big companies that would end up dominating, bringing a lot in. And, the indigenous people I met, and certainly that's not representative of all of them, but really mostly just want to be left alone and would be happy if coca was legal, because then no one would bug them about the coca they're growing for themselves. But I also see that if coca was legal, like other things, there'd be, like with coffee, a lot of people would just want whatever generic coca product they could get, but also there'd be a market for like leaves from certain areas and certain flavors. Coca has lots of different varieties, really, and different the alkaloid profiles, different flavors, and so I think there'd be a market for that. So if groups, we've got the stuff that we grow in this area, I think there'd be a market for those kind of things if indigenous groups wanted to promote their coca or get in on the coca business. But a lot of them just aren't really interested in that so much, and more just want to be left alone with their coca plants and not to do things where they've been doing stuff, right? So, yeah,
there is a national coca, Inaco. There's a national coca company in Peru that's been around for a long time that markets coca products throughout Peru and sells them abroad. The issue is getting them into the United States and Canada for legal reasons. But the commercialization, the potential to commercialize leaves is already underway.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Mark, do we have some more questions coming in?
We do have some more questions. If anybody else has some questions in the gallery, please feel free to raise your hands. But we do have one from our audience for you, Dana. And it was, what is the recommended ratio of, baking soda or alkaloids? And this for you as well, Wade, with coca leaf. Like, is there a specific ratio that one would use with that?
I mean, it'll depend a little bit. I got to look it up now. How we do our Coca chews. I find a bit of like in the areas where they chew it, they'll use very different things across different regions, right? Some areas they use crushed seashells, like he was saying. Sometimes they use ash from quinoa or other plants. In the Coca market in La Paz, in La Paz, there'll be a booth. All the women are there with their big baskets of coca leaves and want you to buy them. There'll be a booth selling the complement, which is they mix it with, and it looks like hash, all the circles and pyramids and cubes, and there are different flavors and different mixes of herbs to make it taste good. And then different alkaloids. But with baking soda, I mean, I normally if I'm lucky enough to have a wad of coca leaves, I'll soak the coca leaves, get them moist in your mouth, add a pinch of baking soda, let that do its thing, add another pinch in a while. You can use a fair amount of baking soda, but the baking soda itself also can burn your cheek a bit if you use too much of it. And a bit of mint leaf can be nice just as a flavoring agent to help take the edge off the baking soda. So when our kit, we sell those three things together. The exact ratio, I haven't answered your question, but
it's always done to taste. It's always done to taste. That's why the mamos are always with the poporo, always putting in their mouth as they see fit. It's seen like the ash is seen, or the lime, in the case of the cal, the seashell fat. What they do with the seashells, they burn the seashells, and then they put the seashells into a calabash and add water, and it sparks an exothermic reaction, which causes an explosion. And then from the explosion, that gets empowerment, as they see, and then they grind that up. But the very best material for adding to coca is made from banana leaves or from cacao pods in the lowlands of Quillabamba, and there it's more like a gooey paste. The other, here, this is here's a whole bowl full of, see if I can make this. There's a bowl full of different forms of yipta. I don't know if you can see that, but let me sit down here. But this is what you would get, in the mountains of, and what this is this would be the ashes of quinoa, which are left overnight just to get a little bit of dew on them and a little touch of human urine. And then it's made into a little ball like this. And these tend to be
a touch of urine,
quite caustic, right? Whereas that's why most gringos would prefer to use bicarbonate of soda, baking soda. But the reason mambe, the powdered form in the Amazon, is the champagne of coca, is that you're taking the powder and you put it on your tongue, let your saliva form, moisten it a little bit, and then maneuver it into a quid, and then the whole thing trickles down to your stomach, and you don't spit out the leaves. And not only do you absorb all the nutrients, but it's got a much more subtle and useful, in fact, effect on the human body. And mambe has become, in Colombia, because it's made in the Northwest Amazon of Colombia, it's become kind of radical chic. I mean, everybody's using it. It's legal by the Constitutional Court. It's available for purchase in shops like Dana's that are found in shopping malls in Bogota and Medellin. People source it from independent suppliers in indigenous communities. The challenge of mambe, if it was to be commercialized, is taking it all to scale, simply because it's a cottage industry at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Mark, I see there's some more questions, and a fellow named Frank has his
yes. So we're going to ask Frank to turn his camera on, and while he does that, I just want to say, Wade, I remember the first time I had the opportunity to meet you with Steve, and we were doing an interview for a Spirit Plant Medicine Conference in 2018. And you were telling a story during that interview of an associate of yours who was having a hard time getting their book finished. And you had said, just chew on some coca leaf. You'll get it done in no time.
Oh, yeah. And, honestly, the reason I've written 23 books is thanks to the plant. No, one of the things, again, the point I try to make about coca as a mild stimulant is that it's not just another stimulant. I'm not a fan of marijuana. I mean, I think it should be legal, but it doesn't do much for me. I'm not a fan of most drugs, really. I've done my share, but that's the thing is that what I say about Coca is that it's a perfect stimulant for the modern workplace. This is why its economic potential is so vast, because it allows you to focus. It gives you this sort of sense of well-being. And one of the things I noticed in that I had a very frenetic life where I was flying somewhere twice a week sometimes, and I'd be doing a speech somewhere and I'd have to get back to my hotel or get back on the plane. At the same time, I'm trying to deliver a manuscript to a publisher. And whereas without Coca, I would sort of be distracted or, just somewhat frenzied. With Coca, I could go and do a speech, get to the airport, get into onto the plane, take some Coca, and go right to the sentence that I had half completed at 9 o'clock in the morning, as if I had never left. And that's one of the unique qualities about the effect of Coca. It is, I've never known a writer who has tried using mambe or Coca leaves and has ever gone back to not using them if it can be avoided. It's the absolute perfect. This is where I keep harping on is that its economic potential is so vast because it is a perfect stimulant for the modern economy. And I mean that in the best sense of the word.
Wow. Well, I know it got me through Spirit Plant Medicine 2018 because the first thing I did was looked up our last organizer at the Urban Shaman and said, do you have any coca leaf? And she's like, matter of fact, we do. So I went and I experienced it myself. And I got to say, what you're saying is exactly what I experienced. So I thank you for that a few years back. Frank's got his camera on. We'll bring Frank here to ask a question. Frank, you can unmute yourself.
Oh, hello there. Yeah, I just plugged in the USB. Sorry, I got a bit of a cold. Huge fan of Wade's, and it's a pleasure to be with all these intelligent people. Sorry for the wavy camera. Trying to be on topic here with Wade. I know he knows a lot about indigenous groups and I think you called it the ethnosphere. I'm curious to hear a tale about Coca, if that's appropriate for the scope of this conversation, in terms of like if you think of a storyteller like Carlos Castaneda, and then he talks about peyote, and then the individuals experience peyote as if it's like a spirit or something like that. And then there's some stories that can be told along those lines. Is there an experience you've had, and maybe there is, maybe there isn't, where someone has spoke to you about Coca in kind of a personal way where they experienced it like an entity, or is that too woo for this conversation today?
No, not at all. But Coca is very much a utilitarian daily adjunct to diet and life. It's I've spoken about its applications as I see it in the modern context, the way we work today. But traditionally in the Andes, it's very much used as an adjunct to outdoor activity and work in an agricultural society. So one of the things that happens in the Andes is labor is always collective labor. And so a group of men and women, the men will go out to the field in the morning, and nobody works alone in their own field. Everybody works together on everybody's field, then moves to the next field. And then at midday, the women all come out with the food for the lunch. And then then everybody gathers together, and then a little bit more work gets done. But after the midday meal, it's sort of more relaxed, and then people go home. But again, at various points, when you meet someone, you say to them in Quechua, shall we sit down together and take of the leaf, Father? It's very ritualized, and you never. One of the things they always say about gringos is that they stuff their mouth like horses eating hay, as I mentioned a few moments ago, because the etiquette of Coca in the Andes is that you take every leaf and you think about it, and you think about the essence of it, and then you strip it with your teeth to take off the midrib of each leaf. And the whole idea is that the process, as you take the leaf, you think about this. And in the case of the elder brothers, I mean, we're talking about a culture that literally believes, and in a bloodstained continent, people never conquered by the Spanish, ruled to this day by a ritual priesthood, the direct descendants of the sun priests of the Tairona. And unlike what Castaneda wrote about, which he just made up, none of that was true, what Castaneda wrote about, particularly his reference to the Yaqui, who don't live like that at all. But the elder brothers really do live as they say, and they are a devotional culture of peace. And the training for the priesthood is 18 years in the darkness. And then the acolytes are taken out before dawn. And during the initiation, they're taught that their prayers and rituals maintain the cosmic balance of the world, the ecological balance of the world. And then they're literally taken out at some point, and they're led on a journey to the heart of the world, a pilgrimage. It takes them from the hut to the ice, from the ice back to the sea, from the sea back to the ice. And having not seen a horizon, having not really seen the world, I've only heard about the world for 18 years, suddenly the world is revealed in all of its beauty and glory. And the priest who trains them says, you see, as I've told you, And so Coca is involved in every single element of that. I mean, I'll tell you one thing I took that was very important with Coca is in the community of Chinchero outside of Cusco, a very traditional community. Once each year, the fastest young boy in every hamlet becomes honored by becoming a woman. And he's known as a Huaylaca, and he puts on the clothing of a woman, and he leads all able-bodied men on a run. But it's not your ordinary run. You start off at 11,500 feet, you run down 2,000 feet, and then you run up to 16,000 feet to the top of the sacred mountain, and then you fall away toward the sacred valley, and then you cross two more soaring Andean ridges over the course of a long 24-hour day, which is less race and ritual. And the perimeter is marked by holy mounds of earth, or itos, mojones, where the Huaylaca must spin to bring the vortex of the feminine to the mountaintop, where coca leaves are given to Pachamama, libations of alcohol to the wind. And the whole metaphor is that you go into the mountain as an individual, but through sacrifice, which means in Latin to make sacred, you emerge as a collective pulse that is once again, as a community, reaffirmed your sense of belonging and your sense of obligation to the lands that are demarcated by that perimeter of that run. And I ran that race, the only outsider ever to do it, when I was 48 years old, as a kind of a midlife crisis. And I trained 6 months in a gym with an African-American boxer to be able to be fit enough to do it. And I ended up having to do it with no acclimatization because the date of the race was changed. So I flew to Cusco, and 4 days later was doing the run. And I swear I only got through that day by chewing more coca leaves in one day than anyone in the 4,000-year history of the plant, But what I really got through the day was because I had baptized children in that community for 30 years, and all my ahijados, when they found out that their padrino was stupid enough to run the movimiento at the age of 48, they clung to me all day long like limpets. They weren't going to let anything happen to their cash cow, because I bought them all, put them all through school and everything. And so that day, really, by the end of that day, you really emerged from the mountain as a single pulse. And I had never been more exhausted in my life. But the highlight of the day was when we reached the highest point in the mountain. The entire run stopped, and they formally adopted me into the community, a community that I've worked in for over 20 years already. But that's how coca is it's just part of life. Coca is the life they hold, and without coca there is no life.
Beautiful.
Thank you so very much, sir.
Yeah, Mark, I'd say we have time for perhaps two more questions at the most.
Yeah,
Can I just say something quickly before we have that thing? Because I wanted just to mention that coca leaf, the coca plant, is anthropomorphized as a woman or as a female. They see it as a feminine plant, and they have a story that is very common in different areas about there being a woman or a goddess or a queen or a prostitute, but who was very sexual and who was disrupting the social order with her open sexuality. And when they tried to send people to kill her, she would just have sex with them and they would be defeated, and she would seduce everybody. And when she was finally killed, because she had to be killed, they cut up her body and spread the body parts around and where those body parts were, that's where the coca plants grow from. And that so there's this story is, I've heard it over and over again in different areas, different variations on a theme, but they see coca as a feminine force, and from this killed goddess, or that it represents the female energy in that way. Just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Dana. Wade, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, but it's true. I mean, I've got, if you look at, let's see if I've got.
No, you're gonna.
I don't. I mean, here's sort of the Spanish version of that story. Is, you know, from the frontispiece of Mortimer's History of Coca.
Well, thank you for that, Wade. Okay, so yeah, we got a couple more questions here. One question from Jason is, does coca leaf have any benefits for PTSD?
Dana?
I don't know. I mean, I've never seen anybody using it for that. Someone came into my shop with PTSD. I'd recommend mushroom microdoses to them, and maybe some bigger dosages of mushrooms. But but I mean, I definitely find it as a stimulant that when I drink coffee, I'm way more jumpy, and coffee would make me cranky sometimes if I had too much coffee, and coca never does those things. So in that sense,
I think, you know, yeah, I think Dana's right. I mean, it's a little bit, I mean, your question is, you know, in all due respect, shows that, again, we've not done our job in a way distinguishing what coca is. It's sort of like saying, do you think tea would be good for post-traumatic stress? Well, sure, it'd be nice to have a cup of tea if you're feeling a lot of anxiety, but it's not going to, it's in a clinical sense, it's not going to be that. It's just not, it's too big, you know, it's too deep a syndrome. Maybe ecstasy or something, you know,
yeah, try the mushrooms. If you got PTSD, check our mushroom dispensary out.
Yeah, you know, but again, I'm not a doctor, so I'm very hesitant to recommend what anyone should do for a serious, problem.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. And I just know MAPS is doing a lot of great work with MDMA for PTSD.
Yeah, but you see, I mean,
so.
but again, you know, I totally agree. I mean, I think when we talk about this whole psychedelic space, there's a lot of hyperbole. I've never felt that ayahuasca, for example, will ever prove to be a very useful therapeutic substance, whereas I think ecstasy is ideal for couples therapy, for trauma, for post-traumatic stress. I think mushrooms are perhaps very useful for palliative care, for hospice care. I think mescaline is extraordinarily useful in San Pedro or in peyote or other associated cacti for the greatest healing journey we all have to go on, which is a healing journey with the earth itself. I mean, nobody takes peyote and comes back with a lesser appreciation of the wonder and beauty of the natural world. Well, that's a kind of healing too that we need to embark upon.
Well said, Mr. Davis. I think that's a great spot for us to really wrap up our session today, because it just really brings us together as a community, and for healing, to acknowledging, you know, the plants, the indigenous people, for the work that they've done protecting the plants and the rituals for all the time. And I just thank everybody for being here, for coming together to learn about these sacred plants, so that we can go forward and, you know, share this, you know, for some of us, you know, newfound knowledge and information, so that we can start changing that stigma around these plants as drugs versus medicines, and that the benefits they've had for, you know, throughout history, and that they can have for us moving forward. So, you know, that's where I'm at in terms of what I want to say, really. But I thank you, Wade. I thank you, Dana, and I thank you, Stephen. And Stephen, if you want to close us off in the beautiful way you always do, I hand it to you, my friend.
Well, thank you, Mark. Well, first of all, obviously, thanks so much for the generous, gift of your time and care, both Dana and Wade. I think that people will find this extremely edifying, and I really hope that at least some of the people who have been watching this will actually go out and participate in the kind of activism and advocacy that is going to be required. It's a big job, but it's doable. It should happen. It must happen. That coca gets the kind of recognition and enters into the culture. You know, Wade's description of it being the perfect, substance for people is just, powerful. It's wonderful. And I also want to remind people that If you missed parts of this, Mark has been recording it and will make it available for you. You can catch the parts you missed later. And also, finally, if hopefully you stayed with us to get the secret password from Dana that will give you a 10% discount on select products from the store, both in person at 651 East Hastings in Vancouver, British Columbia, or through their web store. And you might want to give the website for that too, Dana.
Yeah, so if you come down to our store, I'll give you 10% off anything in the store. Our website's cocaleafcafe.com. Right now, our mail order is books, mushroom kits, and coca leaf powder and for tea. So I'll give you 10% off all those things if you use the code word DIVINE, D-I-V-I-N-E, DIVINE as the coupon code at the end. 10% off the mushroom kits. You can grow 2 ounces of mushrooms at home or more. 10% off all the coca tea, 10% off our books. Also, I'm just going to go back. The person who asked me our recipe, it's for our coca chew. It's 1.8 grams coca leaf, 0.25 grams coca max powder, a third of a gram mint leaf, and 0.6 grams baking soda. So about a 3-to-1 ratio of leaf to baking soda. That's the ratio that we use.
And Dana,
whatever works for you.
Dana, what is that then? Is that, how do you then sell it?
It's in a little pouch, basically. So we pre-mix the leaf together, put it in a little pouch, and then you can just pour it into your cheek. And you can buy the shredded leaf and do it at home yourself, but I like the little pre-done pouch. It's very convenient. And you just pour it in your cheek carefully and do it there. It's like
how big a bag is 100 grams?
Well, you should be chewing about 3 or 4 grams at a time, kind of thing, right? It's not very big. I mean, 100 grams of coca leaf tea is not very big because it's fairly dense, right? So maybe like a Ziploc bag, small Ziploc bag.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Thanks, everyone, for participating in this with us. I hope it's been useful for you. And again, we hope that you will take advantage of finding ways to use this plant beautifully and effectively in your life, and also to help spread its knowledge and recognition.
Thanks again, everyone.
Everybody. Thanks, Dana.
Until next time.
All right, thanks for having me.
And Wade, one last question I have for you. How is your San Pedro growing?
Oh, it's doing great. Oh, the one you got me. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
It's outside in the garden right now. It's doing great.
Beautiful. Yeah. Mine's really taken
so
off
much,
too.
Mark.
So
Appreciate it.
well, it's my pleasure. It's an honor to gift you something that you love so much, and to, the work that you do and your graciousness to share your work with our community. I'm just super
my
grateful.
pleasure. It's a wonderful community. I'm delighted to be a small part of it. Thanks, Stephen, for setting this up.
Good
You
note
bet.
to end on, gentlemen. Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, everyone. Until next time.
Cheers.